Aloha from the Garden Island of Kauai. We would like to invite you for a little bit to visit with Mr. Aziz Yazdi on behalf of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the Hawaiian Islands. Welcome, Mr. Aziz Yazdi.
Thank you very much.
Oh, two?
Two.
Very good.
Yes. Thank you.
Mr. Yazdi,
Yes.
I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Baha'is of the Hawaiian Islands here. And I understand that you have spent many years in Haifa, as well in other parts of the world, in Africa, and now lives in Canada. My question would be, during your time in Haifa, why did you go to Haifa? When did you go to Haifa? Were you able to spend a few times, a few minutes, a few hours with the master, Abdu'l-Baha? And most of all, who is Abdu'l-Baha?
Mm-hmm. This is a very wide question, but I'll try to answer it as briefly as possible. You know, I have to go a little back in the history of our family.
Please do.
My father, when he came from Iran in the year 1869-70, he attained the presence of Bahaullah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, whom we believe also is the manifestation of God for our age. And his intention was to remain in Akka in the service of Bahaullah. But Bahaullah commissioned him to go to Alexandria with few other Baha'is and establish a Baha'i liaison office there, because Bahaullah was in prison and exiled in Akka, and he and his companions. But he had to send tablets and letters to people outside the Holy Land, in Europe, in America, in Iran. Now, these tablets and letters came by trusted courier to Alexandria, and my father's job was to mail them to their destination. And vice versa. Letters from the Baha'is all over the world came by mail to Alexandria, and he found ways and means to bring them to the Holy Land. Now, this continued until the year 1914. It's a very long story. I don't want to go into the details of it. But in 1914, my father decided to take the whole family on a holiday to Lebanon, because Lebanon was the Switzerland of the East in those days. And while we were there, the First World War started, broke up, and we could not go back to Egypt. Now, in those days, the Baha'is were still at the beginning of their activities, and the institutions of the faith, which are now running the affairs of the Baha'i activities in the world, did not exist then. So all of us turned to Abdu'l-Baha for guidance and advice. And my father turned to Abdu'l-Baha and asked him, what do I do? And the master, Abdu'l-Baha, asked him to go to Damascus, start a business there in partnership with Mr. Hussein Iqbal, and to remain in Damascus during the First World War until he called us to the Holy Land. Now, maybe you would want to know a little about who is Abdu'l-Baha.
Yes.
Now, Abdu'l-Baha is the son of Bahaullah. As I said before, Bahaullah is a manifestation of God for today. This is what we believe. And he has come to establish world unity and peace for mankind. In his will and testament, before he passed away, he appointed Abdu'l-Baha as the center of his covenant and the interpreter of his writings. And he called him this most mighty branch, the greatest and immutable promise of God, you know, to safeguard the future of the faith, and to whom all must turn after Bahaullah for guidance and for service. In other words, he was the center of the covenant. And this center of the covenant is special to the Baha'i faith. It's the first time in the history of mankind that this has taken place. And it will have as an effect, as a result, that the religion founded by Bahá'u'lláh will remain united and one no matter what happens, because there is always one source, the center of the covenant, to whom all must turn, and whatever that master says is the final word, and therefore there is no argument. So he told us to go there, and we went, and we spent the First World War in Damascus. We saw horrible things there. The war was really bad, but when the war ended, Abdu'l-Baha called us to come to Haifa. And that's how the whole family, we moved to Haifa and took up residence there and stayed there until the passing of Abdu'l-Baha in 1921, and also a few years after the beginning of the guardianship of Sheikh Effendi. Then Sheikh Effendi told us we can now go back to Egypt.
When you say Haifa, Holy Land, where are you talking about? What area is that, Mr. Yazdi?
In those days it was called Palestine. Today it's called Israel. It is in the Middle East. It is the birthplace of almost of all the religions of the world, and the place where all the prophets of God have come there. And Mount Carmel is the promised mountain of God. They call it in the Bible the Mount of God. And that's where Haifa is located, on the foot and the slopes of that mountain.
When you were in Haifa, you were a young man. What do you remember about Abdu'l-Baha? Did you spend time with him during his prayers? Were you in his presence? Were you able to be in his presence during his prayers? When he visited the people? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, I was not a young man. I was younger than a young man. When Abdu'l-Baha passed away in 1921, I was only 12 years old. And my recollections are recollections of a child between the age of 9 and 12. But there are so many incidents that remain so clear in my mind, because the personality of Abdu'l-Baha is such that you don't forget. It stays with you. It stays with you. It has its imprints in your heart and soul, and you always will turn to him, and he's there living in front of you, and you can talk to him and get inspiration from him. So the few memories I have and recollections are living, you know. They are not just old memories. No. I can never forget them, and every time I think of them or talk about them, if I was living them, really. Now,
will you
please
explain, express?
First of all, every Sunday, there was a meeting in Mount Carmel in the room which is now the resting place of Abdu'l-Baha. It is next to the resting place of the Bab. And the meeting took place there, and Abdu'l-Baha attended this meeting, and he spoke to us. First of all, he used to ask a few of the friends to say prayers, and then he spoke to us. It was such a wonderful moment, really, to be in his presence. You know, as if you are in heaven, in the presence of God himself, almost. He spoke to us about the progress of the faith all over the world, about the future of Haifa and of Akka. He told us that Mount Carmel is going to be built up, light upon light. Now, in those days, our house was adjacent to the shrine of the Bab, and that was the highest but one building in the Mount Carmel. Now, above that house up to the top of the mountain. It's all built up, and all at night it's a beautiful sight to see, light upon light. He told us that Haifa and Akka are going to join, and they have joined. In those days, it was a journey by train, or by car, or by carriage, which took about 2 to 3 hours on the plain of Akka, on the sand. And the carriage used to have one side of it, the wheels, and when one of the horses on the wet sand near the sea, and the other on the other, so that it can pull easier and quicker. That was Akka and Haifa, and Abdu'l-Baha used to admonish us, give us wonderful talks. He was so kind to everyone. And then at the end of the meeting, he led the way to where the Bab is buried, which is the shrine of the Bab. And it was customary that he stood at the gate with a bottle of rose water in his hand, and often next to him there was a prominent Baha'i who came from overseas. And we went one by one, after taking our shoes off, stretch our hand, and he put few drops of this rose water with his blessed hand on our hand, and we spread this all over ourselves as much as possible to be blessed by it. And then we entered the shrine of the Bab. And Abdu'l-Baha was the last one to come in. And his coming in was something that, a picture that I never forget. It was with such humility that when he reached the threshold, he went down on his knees. He put his forehead on the threshold, and you could see the love, the humility that he had for the Bab. It really tears one's heart to see such devotion, such love. What a sight. And then he got up and chanted the tablet of visitation. And his voice was heavenly, beautiful. It just goes into your heart and lifts you up to different spheres in life, different areas in life. And then he went out, and it was the end of that particular meeting. This took place every Sunday, and I dare say I have attended maybe 120, 130 such meetings. Beside this, being a child, I had the privilege of being permitted to go into the household and attend the meeting of the ladies as well. The men had, at those days, had no right to go to the meeting of the ladies. But being a child, I was permitted to do so. There again, I had the opportunity of attaining the presence of Abdu'l-Baha. Now, beside this, there are circumstances. For instance, the 19-day feast took place in the same place where the Sunday meetings were. Before that, I want to tell you a story of an old man there. His name was Haji Muhammad Shushtari. He was a, what you call it, shoe repairer, and he had an anvil in front of the house of the master, the other side of the street, and repaired shoes, and he got little money from the people. But he gathered this money, and when he had enough, once he came to the presence of the master and asked permission, may I be the host of the next 19-day feast? And the master, he liked to joke with him because he loved him. He looked at him, smiled, and said, on one condition. So what can the poor man say? And then he bowed, he says, your wish, whatever you say, beloved master. And the master said, on the condition that you accept Abdu'l-Baha to be your partner as a host. You can imagine how happy this man was just by this sentence from the master. Now, the 19th day feast took place again in the same room where the Sunday meetings took place. Again, the master asked people to say prayers, And then again he spoke to us. And at the end of the meeting, there was a big table with refreshments, biscuits, and things that were tied in tissue handkerchiefs, so that and in a big tray. And then we came one by one, and the beloved master, with his own hand, he gave us one of these, and we went out and ate it. I remember once my younger brother did not come because he was sick. He just wanted you to listen to this to see how thoughtful Abdu'l-Baha is. So when my turn came, I received my share and I kissed it, and I was going out to eat it and enjoy it. The beloved master stopped me and he gave me another one and said, "This is for your brother who is sick." So you can imagine my joy and my happiness. I wanted to run and tell my father, "Look, Abdu'l-Baha remembered my little brother. You know, my very small one." He stopped me again and gave me a third one and said, "This is for your mother who stayed home to look after your brother." Now, this is a lesson to all of us. I don't know if you remember the passage from Abdu'l-Baha about the 19-day feast, how this feast should be a place where the friends, associates become intimate, and if one of them is absent, they should inquire why, and if he needs any assistance, they should extend this assistance. This is a living example of it. A little child is sick. Once only did not come. Abdu'l-Baha remembered. One day I was in the presence of the master in a meeting that took place in the house of the master in Haifa, and among those present there was a young lady who looked anxious and waiting for a moment when she could say something to Abdu'l-Baha. I remember clearly when the meeting was over and Abdu'l-Baha was on his way out, this lady ran to him and attained his presence at the threshold of the room. I was then about maybe 3 to 4 feet away, maybe 5 feet away from the master. And he looked at her, wanting to know what she wants. And she said, "Beloved master, I have a request. Next week is my final examinations to become a nurse and a midwife. And I would like to pass this examination. Please, please, I want to pass." I can't forget this moment. The master turned around and told her, "If you want something from God, say 19 times from the bottom of your heart, Ya Ilah al-Mustaghas." Now, to you people, to you listeners, this is a pilgrim note. In other words, you must take it as a pilgrim note. But to me, who heard it personally from the master, who saw his lips moving when he was saying it, to me this is a text. And I can assure you, all my life, this prayer came to my assistance and helped me and solved many problems. But every time I said it, I closed my eyes and I could see Abdu'l-Baha standing in front of me, exactly as if he was there himself. And I addressed my prayers to him. There are so many such instances. People pleading Abdu'l-Baha for favors, for all sorts of favors. For instance, a family gets a new child. They beg him for a name, and he gives them the name. Someone is sick, they beg him to pray for his health, and he prays for their health. Once as a child, you know, children are naughty. I knew that in the kitchen of the master's house, there were some good things, you know. And I came to the house of the master and I looked around, there was no one there, and there was a big hall. So I ran across the hall to go to the kitchen. And halfway through, I heard the voice of the master calling me. I knew that I'm going to be punished So I stood there, not moving at all, until the beloved master came near me, and instead of punishing me, he stroked my head, my cheek, gave me an apple and some money, and then he said, now you can go to the kitchen. What can you do? It's so beautiful, so lovely, you know. There are many such instances, you know, many such instances. Ya Bahaullah. Yes.
I have a question. You mentioned Abdu'l-Baha said to the young lady to say the prayer 19 times.
From the bottom of her heart.
From the bottom of her heart. Can you explain to me why 19?
Well, there is something
Is it significant?
in religions, especially in the Hebraic religion and the Muslim religion and the Christian religion, called numbers, and numbers have significance. And that's why in the Bible there is a book of Numbers, because it's very important. And according to the system used in the Bible and the Jews and Christianity, the name Bahá'u'lláh, the number equivalent to the name Bahá'u'lláh is 19. That's why we Baha'is, we use the number 19 because it's equivalent to Bahá'u'lláh. In other words, when we say 19, we also have said Bahá'u'lláh. Bahá'u'lláh. And that's why before Bahá'u'lláh, the Bab, when he created the new Baha'i calendar, he gave it 19 months the year, and every month 19 days. So the number 19 was always, even before Bahá'u'lláh, in the time of the Bab, was considered a holy number. And that's why we say it. But you're free to take it or not to take it. This is my feeling, my own feeling. Yes. Any more questions? You know, it's so difficult in these instances to have questions. You like just to listen and hear stories.
It is very exciting to hear these stories. It's like a first hand.
Yes.
You know, with you being there to see and to touch and to hear. These things are exciting to us. See, we were not brought up in the Baha'i faith,
Yes.
but to be able to accept and become a Baha'i, you know, that is a miracle in itself. But to hear words from you about the Master, it will always touch us. And I'm sure the listeners of Hawaii really appreciate this.
Now, let me tell you one more incident which I think has a very important significance. I was present in Haifa during the passing of the Master, and I was present at the funeral. I cannot tell you how immense, how great was this occasion, and how people came from all over for the funeral. More than 10,000 people were present. And in those days, 10,000 people was really a great number. From the governor of Palestine to the little person who almost was a beggar, they came to the funeral. As a child, I was one of the last ones to move, of course. And I could hear people around me, non-Baha'is, weeping, literally weeping, tears flowing from their eyes. One family said, what's going to happen to my husband? Who's going to pay for the doctor's bill and bring the medicine for him? Our father is gone. Yes, I could hear people crying, wailing and weeping because of the loss of the person who used to look after them, help them, see to their needs, pour love on them, guide them. To some, he sent the children to schools. To others, he brought doctors and medicine. To others he gave advice. To others he gave jobs. All these were there, and they were weeping, really, what's going to happen to us? At that moment, I for one realized, when Abdu'l-Baha goes out alone for a walk in the town, what he was doing. Now, in the middle of all this, all of a sudden, I realized, and my younger brother was with me, that a circle opened in this crowd. And in the middle of the circle, there were two figures. I looked, I recognized them. They were the arch cover breaker Muhammad Ali and his brother, and they were walking towards the gate of the house of the master. Obviously, he was thinking that it's his turn to take over. And this circle widened, and hundreds of eyes were gazing on them to see what's going to happen. Silence. Now, the greatest holy leaf foresaw that. She ordered the door locked. On the street there was a policeman, and inside there was my brother, who locked it with instructions not to open it without specific instruction from the greatest holy leaf. So these two walked toward the gate in front of hundreds of eyes. When they reached there, they were told, we have to get permission from the greatest holy leaf. They went in and came back. She does not want to see you. And in front of the same hundreds of eyes, they turned back, head down, defeated. There, even as a child, I felt the power of the covenant, protecting the faith of God, protecting mankind from division. And they went and went, never came back again. That is something that I think everyone should know, that the arch covenant breaker attempted to come in, but the one who defended the ark at that moment was the greatest holy leaf, an old woman, weak, outwardly helpless, and yet she had the might of God with her, and she defended the faith. And this reminded me later of another lady at the passing of the guardian, when everybody had lost his head. There was one lady only, Abdu'l-Baha, who took the rein in her hand and set things going according to the wish of the guardian. I'm saying this so that the women of the world will be proud of their gender, because they accomplish tremendous service to mankind. So there are many small things which I take time to remember them, but this will convey to you Abdu'l-Baha. Abdu'l-Baha had the most difficult life of his time. From the age of 8, he was persecuted until the last moment of his life. I never forget the description of Dr. Yunus Khan, who was his secretary, about when the commission sent from Turkey, from Istanbul, to investigate his case, had come, and this commission was poisoned by the accusation of the covenant breakers and the enemies of the faith, and they had written a report that Abdu'l-Baha should be executed or sent to Fezan in Libya in exile. Dr. Yunus Khan writes, Abdu'l-Baha was standing on the land gate of Akka, watching the ship that was going to take him to Istanbul. Silent. And the Baha'is, few feet behind, silent, but their heart was bleeding. The ship came, and Abdu'l-Baha looked at it and standing. It came and moved toward Akka. Then halfway through, it turned and went straight away. They had just received a cable from Turkey that the government has fallen, that the commission has been recalled for punishment, and Abdu'l-Baha was saved.
During the time that Abdu'l-Baha was in Haifa, he was a prisoner, was he not?
In Akka, he was a prisoner.
And yet he was able to give service to the people. Were they all Baha'is or were they non-Baha'is?
They were all mostly non-Baha'is. The whole town of Akka especially, because this was the time when he was really in prison and under restrictions. But in spite of that, in spite of the instructions of the Caliph of Islam, the Sultan of Turkey, the governor of Akka eventually became almost his servant, and he used to come and get instructions and orders from Abdu'l-Baha. The Mufti of Akka threw himself at the feet of Bahaullah in order to let him, to accept to come out and go to Mazra'ah. He said, we are prisoners, 9 years. But when the Mufti of Akka went on his knees, pleading, he accepted and he went. Eventually, although the order of the Sultan was that Bahaullah and the people accompanying him are going to be prisoners forever. They didn't even mention for life, forever. In spite of that, gradually, Abdu'l-Baha and his personality and his activities and his deeds were such that made most of the government officials become his slaves almost, taking instructions from him and guidance from him. And when he rented Mazra'ah, so that Bahaullah, who for 7 years had not seen one single flower or branch outside cultivated in the garden, he wouldn't go until the Mufti intervened. The Mufti, that means the head of the Islamic faith, and went on his knees and said, pleaded with him to accept going out, and then he went out. Such was the influence of Abdu'l-Baha in that town. The one who was sent there as a prisoner, or was sent to Akka, because Akka was such a filthy place that they say even if a bird flew on top of it, the smell and the stink of the country would kill the bird and they'd fall down. Abdu'l-Baha showed happiness most of the time, but he had tests and difficulties and pains that no human being could endure. I have read myself in a letter he wrote to my father, because my father, it seems, had described something that has happened somewhere which made him unhappy. So Abdu'l-Baha said in this letter, I'm writing this letter after midnight, and I have read your letter and felt as you felt, and my heart went to you. But if you knew what Abdu'l-Baha is going through, you would weep and you would have blood coming down from your eyes, and not only drops. Such is the things I'm going through. But Abdu'l-Baha is patient, and he has a mission to fulfill. So he was also suffering, and yet he conquered his suffering and went and continued the task given to him by Bahaullah.
Abdu'l-Baha, during his services in Haifa, was recognized by the British government and he was knighted. Can you tell me more about that?
Yes. You know, this is an episode where, on the one hand, Abdu'l-Baha helped the people of Palestine who were on the verge of starvation, including the British, because he had a village called Adasiya, and he had ordered the workers there to plant wheat, and that year it gave plentiful, and he distributed this among all the people, including the soldiers, so that they will not feel the effect of the famine. And also because of the intervention of some of the Baha'is overseas, the British government had sent a message to the army, to Lord Allenby, to spare the life of Abdu'l-Baha, because the Turkish general Jamal Pasha, he was the dead enemy of Abdu'l-Baha, and he had promised the people of Palestine that I'm going to fight the British and the French, and when I defeat them, I'll come back, and the first thing I will do, I will hang Abdu'l-Baha at the entrance of Haifa and let the whole world see it. Many times he repeated this. And often he attempted to attain the presence of Abdu'l-Baha, and Abdu'l-Baha did not pay any attention to him, as if he did not exist, until once the German consul intervened, and he told Abdu'l-Baha, please accept this time, and he invited Jamal Pasha and Abdu'l-Baha to dinner. And Jamal Pasha came with his general, sat on one side of the table, and Abdu'l-Baha sat on the other side of the table. And the first thing Jamal Pasha said, this general, there are people in this world who cause mischief. Some of them are politicians, others are religious leaders. And, he meant to be nasty. Abdu'l-Baha smiled, and in front of all these people, he said, some of those politicians have changed the government of Turkey, and they think they did a good deed, and he's one of them. Then he said, let's make an agreement. You gather the might of the Turkish Empire and reunite the people of the Ottoman Empire into one group, one unity. And I will try with my co-workers to unite the world, and let's see who will succeed. And this was said with a smile, but it really hit, really hit. Now the same Jamal Pasha, from there he went to the front, and then before getting to the front, he came back and asked him what happened. He said, oh no, that wasn't the war. And eventually he ran away, and his own orderly shot him and killed him. Orderly shot him and killed him. Now, when the British Army came in, as a gratitude for the services, especially about this, they knighted him, and Major Tudor Paul was the head of the intelligence of the British Army, was responsible for the safety, and he himself became almost a servant of Abdu'l-Baha. Every time he came to Haifa, he had to attain his presence. And his book, and in one of his books, now published in England, something Sand of the Desert, he mentions an incident that took place when he was in the presence of Abdu'l-Baha. He said, I was in his presence, and Shoghi Effendi was there translating. And then, all of a sudden, Abdu'l-Baha tells Shoghi Effendi, get some tea. And Shoghi Effendi goes out to bring tea. And Abdu'l-Baha continued to talk in Persian. And Major Tudor Paul said, I understood every word he said. And I answered in English, and he understood every word I said. And then when the tea came and Shoghi Effendi came, he could not understand a word of the Persian after that. This is an Englishman who is not a Baha'i who writes this in his book.
That was exciting.
It is, isn't it? There is no end to these beautiful things. No. It takes hours and hours and hours, to remember this. I think, let's call it a day, shall we?
Before we do, I understand that you have met Agnes Alexander,
Uh-huh.
and Martha Root,
Yes,
who are hands of the cause of God, buried here in Hawaii.
buried here.
Yes.
Yes, the first time I met Martha Root was in Port Said, I think in the year 1927. I'm not sure, 26, 27. She had come because she had an appointment with Prince Muhammad Ali, the uncle of King Fuad. As a young man, I acted as her guide in Port Said, and she was very kind to me. And she was the type, although she had met many of the leaders of the world and the kings of the world, nevertheless, when she spoke to me as an equal. She encouraged me to learn Esperanto, and she gave me my first lessons in Esperanto. We established the first Esperanto group among the Egyptians there. And one night she told me, tomorrow I have an appointment with Prince Muhammad Ali. The friends advised me to go by train, first class. What do you think? Don't you think that the money I spent on first class, if I saved part of it, I could make another teaching trip? This is Martha Root talking. Eventually she went third class. And third class in Egypt means sitting on a wooden bench with a peasant or villager next to you with a chicken in her arm and the other one a baby in her arm, and she went third class. The prince had sent a delegation of nobility to meet her at the station. They went to the carriage with the first class. There was no one there. They were very disappointed. But I suppose they saw these Americans, anything can happen. So they went to the second class. No one was there. So they gave up and went back. But before leaving the station, they saw an old woman at the end of the train carrying her own suitcase and walking slowly, slowly, slowly. That was Martha Root. And she met the prince. And he was so overwhelmed by her personality that he almost went on his knees for her, in front of her. And then she came back and she told me, you see, God helps. God helps. So this was Martha Root. And then she showed me another rug that someone had offered her. She said, what do I want the rug for? If I sell it, I use the money for teaching the faith. We are here to spread this faith, to bring love, peace, and unity to mankind. Let me make this little sacrifice. So this was the consultation she had with me, a young man of 17. But in reality, it was a lesson that I have never forgotten. Never forgotten. Now, as for dear Agnes Alexander, the first time I met her was in Japan. We came to Japan and we were looking for the Baha'i Center and we couldn't find it. After many efforts, eventually we found it and we went there. It was the 19 days feast in session. So she made me sit next to her. And she asked me to speak about Africa. And I spoke for about 10, 15 minutes and I stopped. She hit me like this. She said, talk more. Say more about Africa. And then when she knew that I attained the presence of Abdu'l-Baha, she invited me the next day to lunch in her pension. And the day after, when I was leaving in the evening, she came from the morning to the hotel. She says, I want to spend the day with you and exchange reminiscences from the time of the master. And she told me of how the master told her to come to Japan as soon as possible, and what were the difficulties that she encountered in finding a passage. Almost all the doors were closed, but she was determined to get to Japan because Abdu'l-Baha said, go to Japan. Until eventually, I'm sure you know the story, she went to Marseille, to the quay, to the port, and waited in front of the ship until there was a vacancy, and they told her, now you can come up. And she went. And then she asked me about my recollections also. There were such beautiful moments when two people have met Abdu'l-Baha and exchange reminiscences. There's something about it that you cannot describe. I tell you one thing, it's beautiful to be a Baha'i. There is joy in every step you take in life, truly. Wherever you go, you have friends that love you and you love them. Wherever you go, the spirit that you encounter lightens your heart. It gives life a meaning. Anywhere where we did not meet these Baha'is who work for the same cause, which is the unity of mankind, peace in this world, love and unity, the fear of God, we find instead of cooperation, there is competition. Instead of consultation, there is debate and fights. And you cannot find that peace. Now with the Baha'is, it's different. They consult because they want to get the best result of consultation. Not to prove a point, but to look for the truth. Whatever they do is for the good of mankind. They sacrifice everything they have. The martyrs in Iran, hundreds of them, they won't just head up to be martyred, to say, I am a Baha'i, I'm the servant of mankind, the servant of God. And this opened the door for so many people to ask, what is it? What is it? So let's thank God that we have found the truth. And it's a blessing that God has given to us without us really deserving it. Bless you.
Thank you, Mr. Yazdi. And to all the friends of Hawaii and the South Pacific, this tape will be available. I would like to end our program with a little prayer. And also I want to thank you again, Mr. Yazdi. It has been a great pleasure, believe me, on my part.
Thank
and I'm
you.
sure the rest of the believers out there.
Thank you.
Oh my God. Amikahali. Amikawan. Amikakulakauhali. Amikanaa. Amikakuahiri. Amikapuhonu. Amikawan. Amikaana. Amika Obaba, Amika Aina, Amika Moku, Amika Mau, Ikekua o ililo oya, o manawa o onai.